Hi everyone. There's been a lot happening at the UN General Assembly in New York City. I came across a source called DRM News, and it's just a good source. I'm not sure where it's based. I think it's international, but it's a good source for showing lots of speeches, not just the big leaders from, you know, G7 countries, but also smaller countries. So it's just a useful source. There's definitely a lot to say about this year's General Assembly. Trump made a trademark rant, and yeah, there's been a lot of interesting things to consider regarding Ukraine and Gaza. Time permitted, I'll make a video about that. Um, for this one, I want to talk about free speech. It's something I've definitely brought up before on this channel, but honestly, it's always relevant. It's not like, okay, I'll make a video and that's that subject covered. It's something that is always relevant because there's always new examples of why this is something we can't be complacent about. Um, Now, a lot of people on the political right would argue that free speech is gone in Britain, that I've even heard some arguments that we're living under a dictatorship and Starmer is Stalin, things like that. I think that sort of hyperbole is not helpful. However, I do think we have free speech challenges in this country. I do think that free speech, in some ways, is under assault. Um, Ironically, that it's often the right bring this about. I wonder how they feel about Palestine Action people being arrested simply for holding a placard. Some of the loudest voices these days on the issue of free speech are from the right, and yet I wonder what their stance would be on that, because I'm guessing they wouldn't be out joining the pro-Palestinian demos. So, how does that square off? If they are really so concerned about free speech, do they not share the concern that people simply holding up placards are being treated as terrorists? To be clear, regarding Palestine Action, they have engaged in some criminal activity, and I think I've said this before, sabotaging military compounds. I don't think that's a small thing. I do think they should be prosecuted for criminal damage. However, the mass arrest we saw recently in central London over Palestine Action was heavy handed because um, essentially they were simply holding placards, simply saying that, people saying that this are pathetic to this movement can garner an arrest. That is disturbing. It is an assault on liberty. Now, if they were taking the sort of just stop oil tactics, like blocking roads and so on, I'd have no sympathy with them. But in that case, they were simply holding placards. Um, I'm in no rush to join Palestine Action, although I feel strongly about the situation in Gaza because I don't trust some of the people behind it, but that's beside the point. So, anyway, I'm just putting that out there. How does the right, reform people and so on that claim we're living under Starmer's dictatorship, do they accept then that their political opponents are also being targeted because of this? Because it isn't just the right. That's the point. They put out the narrative that it's a partisan thing and it's just the right that's being targeted. Well, put it this way, at the Unite the Kingdom rally, there were some arrests over violent disorder. It's been pointed out the only reason there weren't more, because I think it was 25 out of 120,000 people that were protesting. We'll never know the exact figure, but it was a big rally. And so the argument is, well, it wasn't that bad if there was only 25 arrests. The point is, the police were overwhelmed. The police couldn't have arrested every troublemaker that day. So, we're talking about significant trouble over, 3 hours compared to millions of people that attend the Notting Hill Carnival. Because again, this gets into the culture wars. What about the Notting Hill Carnival that has lots of crime? I do think the Notting Hill Carnival has problems, but the right keeps saying that they're peaceful. It is not the case at all. At least they should accept that even if they're personally peaceful, there are troublemakers in their midst, and denying it is just disingenuous. But I digress. Free speech. Now, the Daily Mail had two pieces the other day. I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but the top one is the case in the UK. The bottom one, I guess they're doing just for balance, is the Jimmy Kimmel thing. I know one of my subscribers I got into a debate about this. He argued that I was being, I'm not going to name the guy, I don't want to do that, but he argued that I was being biased and tone deaf. Well, with all due respect to that person, I think you're wrong, because there is explicit examples of Trump trying to rein in on dissent in the United States. And this argument, it's all about ratings, the Jimmy Kimmel thing, I just don't buy it. It's just a very good coincidence, a very useful coincidence for the ratings issue to be brought up at a time when Kimmel's taken off air for what could be considered a sloppy joke. I mean, he played a clip of Trump been talking about golf. Apparently, the implication being it's a strange way to mourn your close friend. And Kimmel made a bit of a flippant comment. I didn't think it was particularly funny, but that's really not the point. If this is really about free speech, if America's supposed to be the land of free speech, then should late night talk show hosts be censored because they make bad jokes? And as for the ratings thing, I don't know how accurate that is, but there's many people support Jimmy Kimmel. Now, the latest is he's been reinstated, but the implications are sinister. Donald Trump has explicitly stated that networks that criticise him should be taken off air. That's censorship at the highest level. That's an absolute abuse of executive power, and it's dictatorial, without question. For me, there's no secret that Trump's a wannabe dictator, but that's quite explicit. Now, I could just hear noises downstairs. I might get a call up in a second. I'm not going to restart this video because I've already done it. So if I have a little intermission, that's why. The first post in the UK is about an American woman, a Trump supporter by the name of Deborah Anderson, and she apparently had an officer turn up to her house and ask her to apologise over a threatening post she made. But the catch is that the officer didn't tell her what that post was. This was in Slough. She's a cancer patient, which doesn't really help the optics. And that's what it says. The MAGA-backing mother of two was accused of upsetting someone by writing an allegedly threatening post on Facebook, which was reported to police. But the officer declined to say which of the alleged comments had been complained about. I don't understand that. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, if she did threaten someone, you can't go around threatening people. I don't think that's a legitimate part of free speech, but that's a bit about that case that stands out to me, that the officer couldn't say which part. Why not? Don't people have a right to know what they're accused of so they can defend themselves? So that's another example. I don't think she was actually arrested, but the very fact that this officer turned up to her door, and in this country, it's sort of a subtle aggressiveness. In most of these cases, the officers aren't actually abusive, or we're not talking about police brutality per se, but these are uniformed officers that are turning up at people's homes when they should have better things to do. Now, probably I wouldn't get on with this woman. I'm going to read out what she said. In the 2-minute clip, a male officer is seen entering Miss Anderson's property as she says, "You can come in, but you better have a damn good reason for being here. I'm a member of the Free Speech Union, and I'm an American citizen. I'll have Elon Musk on you so quickly." Oh yeah, fretting Elon. "Your feet won't touch the floor." Inside, the unidentified officer tells her something she had allegedly read on Facebook had upset someone. Upset someone. "You're here because someone got upset," Miss Anderson replies incredulously. "Is it against the law? Am I being arrested?" The officer says she was not being arrested and explains, "My plan was, if you were admitting that it was you who wrote the comment, you could just make an apology to the person. I'm not apologising to anybody, I can tell you that. Are there no houses that have been burgled recently? No rapes, no murders? Why aren't you out there investigating those?" she asked the officer. "I haven't broken any laws, so you're going to be wasting your time when you can instead be doing things that are more important," she adds. "I'm a cancer patient. You can see that because I'm bald. I'm a woman living on my own who has never broken a law in her life." Thames Valley Police said no further action had been taken and insisted it had a duty to respond to allegations of threatening language. A spokesman told the Daily Mail in June, "We received a report from a person who felt threatened by comments directed at them online. Following engagement with both parties, no arrests were made, no further action was taken." Okay, but that isn't the point. You're having a uniformed officer turn up at someone's house for something she said online. What gets me is not the emphasis on the threatening part. It's the fact the officer said you upset someone. Now, I would say there's a difference between a threat and upsetting someone, which could be abstract. Upsetting someone could be, saying something cheeky to them, calling them a bad name. Threatening someone is a bit more serious. So it may be that, there's more to this. But I think the police do themselves no favours in their explanations and in their approach to these things. I really don't think they do themselves any favours. The fact that no arrests were made is not really the point. It's pretty intimidating having a uniformed officer come to your house to basically fuck police. Recently, Sir Mark Rowley spoke about how the police were being dragged into these things, and he wanted to suggest to the Home Secretary, the then Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, so I assume he'll be bringing it now to Shabana Mahmood, over how the police aren't dragged into these culture wars things. I think one problem in British policing in recent years is common sense has been lost. Now, technically, if someone has made a threat, the police do legally have to follow up. I mean, you can imagine if, for instance, a threat was made and the police done nothing, then there was an act of violence. Then the criticism would be, why did you not follow up on that? So we do have to bear that in mind. But for me, it's this absolute nonsense of not even telling the woman what she supposedly... I mean, that's ridiculous. That makes no sense. So that's why I said the explanations don't really add up. It is troubling. It is. But I will say that we should take no lectures from the United States on this. None at all. And unlike some people, I don't think that a billionaire with an agenda like Elon Musk is the answer to our problems. I think we need to keep raising concerns about this. And I think Starmer's routine answer about, a proud history of free speech in this country, it's kind of evasive. It isn't addressing the specific concerns that are happening now. Yes, we do have a proud history of free speech in this country, but that's kind of ignoring the concerns that people have. So I'm not impressed by Starmer's response to it. I think he could be a bit more explicit in saying, look, people have the right to disagree. People even have the right to say snarky things. Being offensive shouldn't be a criminal thing. So a lot of common sense is being thrown out the window. Having said that, I'm a little bit hesitant about jumping fully on board with the Free Speech Union, because I think that Toby Young and others in that organisation, they kind of take the attitude that anything goes. You can say anything you want and it's fine. Now, I don't think it's okay to go around making threats, and I certainly don't think it's okay to make false accusations. So, free speech absolutism is not necessarily something that should be encouraged either. Why? Because if you truly think that people could say anything they want, now let's be really clear about this, anything, that actually would include threats. The threats are words. False accusations are words, but I think most people would agree that's not okay. So I would challenge Toby Young. Do you accept that if people make threats or false accusations, then that's not something that should be normalised? It's not something that should be acceptable. And in some of those cases, there should be police action. For example, if a woman falsely accuses a man of rape and his life is destroyed as a result, should she not face some sort of action? Now, technically, those are words that she has used. She hasn't been violent. She hasn't stolen anything. But her words have destroyed a life. So, my challenge to free speech absolutists is, what's your take on that? Well, how about someone who clearly incites violence, says, these people are living in this building, you should go out and burn it down. And then, let's say they have a lot of followers, and those people then follow out, carry out an arson attack, and people die. Are you seriously saying that the person who done that should face absolutely no consequences, that it's absolutely fine? This is definitely something that's been a bit of a partisan football. We see Lucy Connolly turned into like the poster girl for free speech. I still maintain my position with that, which is that the long prison sentence was heavy-handed, but I don't think... Firstly, she didn't delete her post immediately. That is just not true. She took 3.5 hours to do it. And her initial reaction was that she would play the mental health card. So I don't think Lucy Connolly, I don't really go along with the narrative that in a moment's frustration she said something reckless and then, she immediately regretted it. She did not immediately regret it. I think the prison sentence was heavy, particularly given that the Labour councillor who made a violent rhetoric did not get a prison sentence. Legal experts say, oh, it's different because she pleaded guilty and he didn't, but that does look like double standards. Basically, what we come to with all of this is individual liberty and individual responsibility. The liberty part is people should not have police coming to their doors because they've said something online. They should be able to say whatever they want short of threats. But the responsibility part also comes into it. There is some people who say incredibly stupid things online, and they do see no problem with inflaming things, with spreading false information, with false accusations, and that false accusations thing, it should also be proportionate. I mean, saying something about a powerful figure like the Prime Minister or Donald Trump or whoever, I don't think it's really the same thing, because the implications are not they won't have the same effect as they would have on a regular person, put it that way. So, I would make an exception for that because it could just be misplaced information. But when it's a private individual, for example, this person who lives at number 5 is a paedophile, and then that person is targeted by violent vigilantes and they turn out to be totally innocent. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. So I do think there's a problem in this country, and I'm not impressed by the Prime Minister's response. I think that the police need to stop prioritising these cases. Now, like I say, if they get a report of a violent threat, they may technically have to follow up on that. I understand that. But there's still things that doesn't make sense regarding how they go about it. Not telling this woman what she was being accused of just doesn't make sense. Surely she should have a right to defend herself and explain the situation. If the officer had said, well, it was this specific post, but you know what, maybe he didn't even know. And that just shows incompetence. If you're going to go to someone's house, you should have the evidence. Or at least, another mistake the police have made is just they're playing the jury. They're going and basically assuming someone is guilty. They're not listening to both sides. If you have two people in a dispute, the police should be fair. They shouldn't just go in and assume one side is guilty because the other side has said so. I don't know what this woman said, but if it was a threat, that, it would depend on the nature of the threat, because that's another thing. Someone might make a flippant threat in the heat of the moment, or they might make a joke that is, a bit reckless. I mean, what Lynham said recently, I forget the guy's first name, the Father Ted writer, and he, faced officers at Heathrow Airport, and there was the whole furore over that. He joked that trans women should be punched in the balls. Now, some would say it's just a joke. Others would say, actually, there is a threat in that. Trans people do face violence. So, I think a lot of that is abstract, and I think the police need to assess the situation to see, is there really a credible threat here, or is it just someone being a bit flippant? As a general rule, I don't think people should go around making threats, or even if it's in a joking format, because we do live in an era where there are some crazy people out there. We do see violence in society, and I think that, joking about violence it's unfunny, because it can, what's one person's joke is in bad taste to someone else, but I still don't think bad taste is a reason to censor someone. I'm just saying my own opinion here. I don't think that people should joke about violence in that way. But that doesn't mean that he was actually promoting violence. This debate isn't going to go away. And anyone who doesn't like Labour and Keir Starmer are going to continue saying we're living in a dictatorship, we have no rights. And every time a case like this happens, it's going to exemplify that. I think the police need to really, really reflect on themselves and reflect how they're doing this, because they're going to say, oh, look, we're just following up on legislation. I don't entirely go with that. I think sometimes, frankly, it's an easier option than taking on actual criminals. And I'm not saying that the police don't do that. I'm not saying there aren't officers who take very real risks and take on dangerous criminals. Those are, officers that deserve credit. But I do think the police sometimes will take the path of harassing Jill and Joe public over thought crimes. I do. I think that is an ideological decision that police forces often make. And I keep going back to that incident in Hertfordshire because it stayed with me. The couple who complained about their daughter's school having 6 uniformed officers. Now, even if the police argue we have to follow up on these things, how do they justify 6 officers? How do they justify those officers being uniformed? If it's a non-crime incident, why are they treating it like, they're dealing with some dangerous drug lord or something like that? I think the police, so they say, well, we're being dragged into this. No, they're making the decision to prioritize this. And I think they're losing the public trust because the public see them as mitigating common sense. That's the situation in the UK. But, the United States, we shouldn't take any damn lectures from J.D. Vance or Donald Trump or Elon Musk on any of this. That's why I have a problem with, reform people and right-wingers in this country thinking that Elon is her saviour. I mean, she says, I'll get Elon on to you. Well, if she, she believes that she's a victim of free speech crackdowns, okay. Well, what does she have to say about her hero threatening networks that disagree with him? So does she really believe in free speech across the board, or is she only upset because she was targeted? Graham Lineham, I just couldn't, brain freeze, I couldn't remember the guy's first name. So anyway, I'll wrap this up, but this is one of the major issues of our time, and I want to be very clear, I don't think the government's handled it well. Now, non-crime hate incidents were not invented by Labour, they were being used under the Tories' watch as well. But Starmer's routine answer is, I believe in free speech, we have a long-standing tradition of free speech in this country. That's not good enough. People are genuinely concerned. And it isn't just the right. So he needs to go further. He needs to publicly call on the police to not prioritise these cases. I do understand that where people have complained about a threat, the police need to follow up on that. And I wonder what the free speech union's view on that is. I mean, if a threat was actually carried out and the police done nothing, they would be criticised for that. So we need to be fair there. But for me, the issue is, I mean, this absolute nonsense that they couldn't even tell her what she'd supposedly said. What is the rationale behind that? If you're accused of something, surely you should have a right to know what you're accused of. And that suggests that the police are being partisan. They are taking sides, rather than being objective and trying to diffuse the situation. Instead of diffusing the situation, they're just provoking people. They're intimidating people, actually. It doesn't matter that no arrest was made. And again, I can say this person is, her hero Donald Trump. He's having ice thugs go in and put Korean workers at a Hyundai factory in shackles and all the rest of it. But whether I agree with a woman's politics or not is beside the point. It's bad optics. It's bad optics. And Thames Valley Police need to explain why couldn't they tell her, what she was accused of. That just makes no sense. It makes no sense. So, in summary, I think actually both the UK and the US have free speech problems. And I actually think in some ways the United States is worse. For all their talk of the First Amendment, there you have a movement, a political movement, and a president who is actively cracking down on dissent. In the UK, we have very flawed legislation, but this was not brought in by Keir Starmer. Starmer's response to it has been weak and tone deaf. But it isn't Starmer that has invented it. It isn't Starmer that's sending out police to follow up on these incidents. Those operational decisions are made by the police, not by the government. The government, of course, can change legislation, and I think it's time that they did. When I contacted the Liberal Democrats about this, because I wanted to know their stance, They didn't go along with abolishing non-crime hate incidents, but they did say pretty much what the government said, that the police should, use common sense in this regard. That's just the problem, though. They're not. So a lot of this does come down to policing accountability, um, holding the police to account, exposing when they cross a line. Thank goodness for a free press. I don't agree with everything the Daily Mail comes out with, but without that, I wouldn't know about it. Or someone might post it online, but it's a free press is extremely important. It doesn't mean that the press can't be criticised. It doesn't mean that they don't sometimes have sloppy journalism, but without it, this sort of stuff wouldn't even be covered. So it's very, very important. Um, and that's it, really. I just think that people shouldn't go around making threats or, um, saying things that you wouldn't necessarily say to someone in real life. But let's be honest, there's times when we all perhaps get wound up about something and when we say something that we might later regret. I do not think the police should have any business following up on someone who simply had an argument or used spicy language, to put it that way. Even if they've insulted someone, so what? Frankly, people should toughen up. If someone insults you, throw it back at them or block them. Don't run to the police, because you're taking away resources from victims of real crime. People who've been burgled, people who've been sexually assaulted. If you're running to the police because someone's insulted you, I think it's different online as opposed to, let's say someone's in the street and they're minding their own business and they suddenly get a torrent of racist abuse or sexist abuse. That that's harassment. That is not free speech. So absolutely, the sort of the obs who engage in that should be targeted. I have no problem at all with that. But what we are seeing is people targeted simply for having a different point of view. That is what's happening. So I am concerned about the situation in the UK. I'm just a little bit wary of the Free Speech Union, what their stance is, for example, on inciting violence, because when the Lucy Connolly thing happened, Toby Young's attitude was, oh, well, she had a brain fart, i.e. she was just a bit stupid, that's fine. She shouldn't have said it was a bit stupid, whatever. I think he's underestimating the implications of inciting violence. It's no small thing. Let's not forget last year rampaging mobs went across the country threatening to burn people alive. That didn't come out of nothing. There was information online fueling that. And I also agree with the Prime Minister that where you have sites that are encouraging suicide of young people or paedophilia, absolutely there should be a crackdown on that. But the Online Safety Act, again, there's nuances involved. It's not just targeted those sort of extreme things. It's targeted a lot of other things as well, which really shouldn't be targeted. So how that legislation is drafted maybe needs seriously amended or abolished. Um, but I would say to this is the final thing I'll say. Yes, we believe in free speech. Yes, we must protect this. However, reasonable people should also accept that you can't yell fire in a crowded theatre. You cannot go around threatening people. Um, and the right-wing hypocrites who claim that they're the great defenders of free speech are now going along with Trump cracking down on it because of anyone who ever dared to criticise or disagree with Charlie Kirk. There's a very sinister trend going on. So, yes, we have issues in this country, but we should not take any lectures from the United States on this.